Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Thanks for joining us today, and welcome to our IIASA Voices event. This marks the 10th installment of this ongoing series showcasing the valuable contributions of IIASA to the general public. And today we are very happy to present you a very outstanding lineup. As you know, IIASA conducts policy-oriented research, typically using systems analysis. That's sort of our trademark, and we are addressing problems that that are too large or too complex to be solved by a single country or by a single academic discipline. Such problems include climate change, just societies, natural resource managements, to name just a few. So our scientists are not just scientists; they are also networkers. They partner with other scientists. They partner with governments, with local authorities, with agencies to create, a broad understanding of the challenges that concern us all, that I've mentioned. And our goal is to deliver important scientific information that can be used by different levels of government and to support decision making for our joint future and for the future of our societies. We believe that this information should be available to all, and we are also interested in new perspectives, which is why we've launched this series. It's a conversation with IIASA experts, which begins with some presentations and is then opened up to questions and answers. We will send around a short survey at the end of the event, and we would really hugely be grateful if you take a few moments to fill this in. My name is Fabian Wagner. I will be your moderator today. And at IIASA, I have two roles. I'm a principal research scholar in the Energy, Climate and Environment program. And there I'm largely working on climate change economics, as well as air quality management. These are two very different, but very fascinating areas. But I'm also the Dean of the Capacity Development and Academic Training Unit, and as such, I would like to give you a short presentation, very, very short, just a few minutes, on what we do in terms of capacity development here at IIASA. I kind of see capacity development and academic training here at IIASA in developing into three branches or three trees. That's why I like this. Why I like this picture. On the one hand, our first branch is the immersion in IIASA research. So we bring people to IIASA to work with IIASA researchers on methods and tools developed here at IIASA to understand how systems analysis is done in practice. The second branch contains trainings for groups and teams. We have developed relatively complex modeling frameworks, and that to use them requires some training. So this is typically situations one on many. And then the third branch that we're developing is really the capacity development. It's the capacity internally to do systems analysis and pursue interesting academic career paths. Let me talk about our flagship program, the Young Scientist Summer Program, the YSSP, which you will hear more about from my colleagues. This is a 3-month program running from June to August. It involves a research stay here at IIASA, and the goal is really to work with IIASA scientists and to work on a project that should result in a publishable paper or chapter in a PhD thesis. The topic is wide open, but it has to be relevant to IIASA, and the guidance will be provided by senior scientists here at IIASA. It's an ambitious scientific program, and we bring 50 people from around the world. Fellowships are available as well. Next application deadline is the 12th of January 2024. Then we have these other immersion programs. We are hosting professors and senior researchers for their sabbaticals or as visiting scholars. We're hosting postdoctoral fellows. The Marie Curie Fellowship is one of those programs that we are supporting. We also have bilateral programs with Peking University, with the UK, with South Korea, and with Israel. And we are, over the year, we're hosting various masters and PhD students during their secondments as part of their studies. The second branch that I mentioned is that we have these modeling frameworks. We regularly offer trainings on them, including on GAINS, message, CATSIM, C1M. You will hear about some of these frameworks today, and we're planning to continue these kinds of trainings. And then the third branch is really the training of researchers here at IIASA, early career researchers. And this is sort of what I would call is the IIASA wheel of skills development. We sort of see that researchers in the field of very, addressing relatively complex problems requires skills that go beyond the skills that you would acquire typically at the university. Here at the right bottom corner of this wheel, I mentioned some of the systems, the relevant systems analytical skills. We will be sharing these presentations through the platform. I'll just keep it short. We don't need to go into the details. I'll now go back and introduce our first speaker to you. This is Sylvia Tramberend. She's a research scientist in the Water Research Group in the overall Biodiversity and Natural Resources program here at IIASA. Her key research interests and main responsibility include scenario development, identifying solution pathways until in the middle of the century. And she's focusing on the food, water, energy, environment nexus. That's a very, very complex nexus, and sustainable consumption in a globalized world. So she studies linkages between the biophysical and socioeconomic domain. That's very typical of IIASA, that we don't just look at the biophysical world or just the socioeconomic systems, but at the linkage. So her work is really highly interdisciplinary and policy oriented, and she's very engaged and committed to capacity building. So Sylvia, the floor is yours. I think you need to switch your, and you need to switch on your microphone. Microphone? No, it's still not on.
Now it works?
Yeah.
Yes, okay, and the screen is fine.
Yes.
Good, so thank you. Thank you, Fabian, for introducing. I have to move back to the beginning of my presentation. A warm welcome from my side to all the scholars around the world. My focus here in this talk is about IIASA's variety in building capacity. And I would like to, and I ask you to follow me on two narratives. One is from receiving capacity, being a mentee, to mentoring. The other one is from capacity building to co-development, so the work with stakeholders. And I will introduce you, I will discuss this all by highlighting the variety in capacity building approaches in IIASA. So let me step into the first one. This is the Young Summer Scientist Program. What you see here is a slide of the total number of scientists as they evolved from 1977 when it started up to around 50 to 60. We are still at 50 to 50, around 50 scientists. And the lower line shows the female participation, the women participation, which is now at 50% since about 20 years. And what you see here, that is me joining IIASA as a YSSB in the mid-1990s. So it was so at that time I received capacity from IIASA. It was a strong experience, of course, not only in terms of networking and my understanding of the world as a whole. It was in the mid-1990s, the Soviet Union just opened up. I was also content-wise, I think I learned my first lesson here in systems analysis. When I came here, it was a bit, I expected to be told what I should do, but I came here and I was advised, encouraged to design a framework or to approach the questions with the framework, which was at that time, it was about long-term soil pollutants. So looking backwards, I think it was a good introduction to systems analysis, that you should look beyond your wider framework and that you are rarely told what you should do, but you are advised maybe in terms of frameworks, but you are encouraged to think about the whole system. So once a little bit more about the YSSB, when I joined in the mid-19s, over time I joined IIASA after that. There were over the years almost 2,000 YSSB, maybe even more, and an invaluable network has been developed. So after 2000, I became a doctoral degree, then later PhD. I started to move from being a mentee to a mentor. Means that over the years I have mentored, I don't know, I think dozens of PhD students from around the world. I just would like to focus on this one, which is the Southern African YSSB, which was an initiative in 2014 and 15, which I liked in particular, not only because of the work with the students, but also it was something where it was physically located in South Africa, but had a strong virtual component. But the advantage for me was not only the work with the student, but also to get to know the supervisors of the Southern African students. In parallel, on the top form, I was also mentoring. Over time, IIASA developed a postdoc fellowship program, and I'm currently working with an Israeli fellowship. There is one Israeli fellow just next door here at IIASA who has joined IIASA then. And one outcome of these South African YSSB was the Southern African Systems Analysis Center, which leads me to the next form of capacity enhancement at IIASA, which are regional systems analysis centers. To date, there are two in place. One is the Southern African one, and the other one, there's one which is the Northern African Applied Systems Analysis Center. I think you can look it up or can ask questions afterwards. I move on. So this Northern African Systems Analysis Center, I was personally in Cairo in 2018. There was a training workshop. So that's also what IIASA sometimes does. That time was a 5-day hands-on training workshop where so it was the IIASA water program. I am in the water security group here. And we went to Cairo and met students there organized by the Academy of Scientific Research and Technology. And we had a 5 days workshop, which included 3 elements. And I will go through them because they show different approaches how capacity building can work. So what I like in particular is one which is what is called serious games, and it leads us already. It's for building capacity, but it's also a lot used for stakeholder involvement. In Cairo, I participated in this game, so I'm not the developer of it, but I co-developed the input. The main information you have here on the lower bottom, 3 people whom you might contact if you are more interested in it. But basically what you are doing here is either students or stakeholders. This is in a watershed. So you have vested interests across the watershed between upstream and downstream. And the players, they take on roles and they play those roles. And ideally we connect this game with our modeling world, which would allow us to to ask questions and answer them with quantitative assessment. So that's one, the games. The next one is the community water model. It is one of IIASA's model. And what is being done here, it's an open source model. It's in GitHub, you can access it. And I think colleagues, they develop very nice YouTube series, so you can check it up. There's this coding in C.M with Sylvia, which it's not me, but it's my fellow Sylvia colleague. And I think it's a very effective way of teaching models, because it leaves also the instructor, it gives them some time. So they usually send them to the YouTube series, and then when it becomes when students become more elaborated, they ask specific questions. Another possibility is this global ecological zoning models. It's an agricultural model, where we have developed, there I was also involved together with the Food and Agriculture Organization. We have developed a data portal where you can access dozens of, well, 10,000s of maps with model results. Here's an example for attainable yield for cassava under rain-fed conditions, high input management for a certain time period. You can also look into climate change effects. So data portals is another possibility. And this leads me already, so you probably ask yourself what is applied systems analysis, and there may be many answers to that. My personal answer is that for me, applied systems analysis has two key characteristics. One is that it's interdisciplinary, so many disciplines have to work together. And we work, so the applied part is that we work towards a societal impact, and that means usually involving stakeholders. So on the right-hand side, what you see is that it's a typical example of an assessment framework. It's one of a number that exists at IIASA, but it has three key characteristics. One is that the development scenario we develop together with stakeholders. So what kind of future are they interested in? Then it has a biophysical component. This is this left-hand side. So a climate model or climate forcing feeds agricultural suitability modeling. The output is land productivity. And then you have climate impact assessments, and then you have a socioeconomic part. So it's the world trade market, which is the world market, the agricultural market, which is here. Let me show you a second example. This is more from the water perspective. Again, we have a scenario part on the top where we co-develop with local stakeholders. We have a biophysical environment, which is climate forcing, that goes into this C.M hydrological model to calculate hydrological futures. And then we connect it to an economic part, the hydroeconomic model, which is in this case an optimization model. And that leads me already to this next, my second narrative line, which is from capacity building to co-development. So when we do projects, the co-development, so the stakeholder involvement is very much, it's very similar to capacity building, because in essence, we have to explain each other. We have to learn from our stakeholders, and they have to learn from us what we can do, what we can research, what we can quantify. What you see here is a project, a scale-based project, which I was leading the last 2-3 years, and there it was about upscaling sustainable agricultural practices in East Africa, in the Lake Victoria Basin. And the stakeholder consultation, a key element was a community of practice, which we set up and which was coordinated by our local partner, the Lake Victoria Basin Commission. And in that same project, we had one other element, which is this, which I call South-North capacity exchange. We integrated master students, and I think it was a very cost efficient and I think hopefully useful for the students also, but they were quite, the response was positive. What we did is that in the project, we supported local master students in East Africa to do their research, which they did anyway, which was connected to our main research teams, and we offered them to integrate them in our scale-based research project, which had then some. So what you see here on the right-hand side is we distributed certificates at the end, which were signed by the executive secretary of the Lake Victoria Basin Commission. And this is leading towards my final slides. I want to, if you are interested in IIASA's capacity building world, I would point you to IIASA Connect. It's a knowledge sharing platform. I checked this morning, it has 2,881 people. You find their trainings, coffee talks, events, groups, YouTube videos. It has also this science communication platform. It has groups. What you see here, this is you can set up your private group, what I did for the scale-based projects. I am also a member of the Women in Science group, which is one of many groups in that platform. Again, for more information, Monica Bauer is the soul behind IIASA Connect. And that leads me to my final one, where I just wanted to reiterate that, in my opinion, capacity building and system analysis is a vicious circle between learning and explaining. So being mentee and becoming a mentor. That's I stop with that.
Thank you, Sylvia. And I hope you said
I,
virtuous circle and not vicious circle.
Virtuous, yes. Okay.
Okay.
So I stop sharing screen, Fabian.
Yes. Thank you.
And yeah.
And thanks very much, Sylvia. Please, if you have questions to Sylvia, write them in the chat. We will come back to the questions after the end of all presentations. Now I would like to give the floor to our next speaker, Katya Perez Guzman. Katya is a research scholar in IIASA's Strategic Initiatives Program. Her main interest is to develop and promote quantitative scientific instruments to inform public policy on climate change. In Mexico, she supported in the past the IIASA the so-called Fable project, Food, Agriculture, Biodiversity, Land and Energy, Fable. She did this from 2019 to 21 as part of a larger food and land use coalition initiative. Her main responsibility back then was supporting capacity development and capacity building and the development of the Fable calculator, which is an Excel-based model, which she will talk about as well, that performs integrated analysis of the nexus between land use, food, and agricultural systems. And not only that, but it also includes biodiversity, climate change, and water. So you see this is a rather intricate tool that focuses on this complex interaction and nexus between these different topics. So Katya, the floor is yours for 10 minutes.
Thank you very much. I will share my screen. Perfect. Thank you, Fabian, for this opportunity of sharing my passion of building capacity in systems analysis for sustainability. I want to share with you guys 3 topics about this passion on capacity building and systems analysis. As Sylvia was mentioning, I tend to think of systems analysis as a synonym for complexity. So I will talk about complexity a little bit. That will be my first topic. My second topic will be to talk about the Fable consortium, as Fabian already introduced. and ending with the specific actions that we have done in this direction. To begin, see what I mean by complexity, we see right now in this slide common pictures, right? Agriculture, cultivation, wheat, livestock. This relates to the agricultural system that we all relate to because we eat food. And some of us produce food and all of us eat food. And some of us are professionals responsible for managing the agricultural system, which I'm sure it is very complex, right? It entails productivity, soil management, fertilizers, and so on. For sustainability, we can totally learn more about the agricultural system, but I would say that it is not enough to just stay in this sector or in this system, because there are many other systems or other sectors that have very, very intricate links. For example, if we're talking about food production, we also need to talk about food consumption at the same time, right? It's not enough to plan how we're going to produce the food if this food is not healthy for people. We also need to think about the nutrients that we want. The food that we will produce needs to be also the healthy food that humans eat. And not just that, but it also needs to be the food that people in one country need, right? So we talk about healthy food production, sustainable food production, or food security. That also needs to be taken into account in this more complex system beyond just the agricultural. But again, this is not enough, right? If we're going to want to talk about the whole sustainability challenge into the future, we also need to take into account the systems that are around the land where the food is produced. We see agricultural farms in this picture, but we also see many other things around it, right? We see ecosystems, we see forests, we see people living there. And the main challenge of sustainability for the planet entails trying to capture this complexity or these many systems interacting among each other, not just at national scales, but also local and global scales at the same time. And do this in a way that it's clear, that is common, that can be items in a discussion between different people. So you can see how this is really pretty much our current challenge. How do we make tools, maybe models, maybe others like Sylvia has shown, like games, that can help us understand these more complex, more global level problems in an integrated way, as we call it in IIASA. This is a topic that I am very interested on continuing, and this is definitely the main objective behind the Food, Agriculture, Biodiversity, Land Use, and Energy Consortium, or in short, Fable, of a long acronym. What is Fable? Let's talk about the number 2 topic. It was a collaborative initiative launched in 2017 to support country teams to, as we see, develop and improve these tools to think about these different systems and how they interact together. To definitely inform national policy, but more importantly, to do it collectively in a consortium so that we see the possibility of meeting global targets, for example, the Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Agreement. Right now, we are 23 country teams working together in this direction with 23 different models, trying to see how we can achieve goals. And this is also an invitation for you, you guys who are listening to us right now. If your country is not represented here, please let the Fable Consortium know how you can become part of this consortium if this is of interest to you. When we talk about tools and models, we already know that there are many models, right? Sylvia already showed us a little bit of a sample of some models that IIASA does. Some of them are very accessible. Some of them are super complex. I myself looked at one model once and I almost got dizzy. So many programming lines, so many things to think about. So maybe we're not talking about a lack of models, but we're talking about how these models are actually accessible to most of the people who would like to think about these problems and try to solve them. So what the Fable Consortium wanted to do was definitely to use the models that we have, for sure, but also create tools that could be more accessible to people like me who do not program, people who may not be very familiar with deep scientific insights of the sciences behind all the systems, but who would still like to inform many of these interactions. The Fable calculator was created as an Excel-based non-programming tool that incorporates these different systems and can make the user achieve in a very simple way long-term pathways in the way that these different systems interact with each other. There is no time right now to go into detail of what the Fable calculator is. In fact, this is exactly what the capacity building that we do is about. So if you're interested, please let us know. What I can definitely say is just the overview of the model, just to give you this taste of how what we talked about in the beginning of this presentation of this complexity of systems at different scales is traduced, how it is translated into an Excel-based model. So we start talking about human consumption indicators, then we relate them to livestock production and crop production in a very, very simple way. Simple enough that one can handle it easily, but also complex enough that it can capture the reality of your country. Then we analyze how these different indicators of consumption and production relate to different land use, for example, to pasture, to cropland, and what are the trade-offs between the increase of these pastures and croplands and other type of land uses like forests, right, where biodiversity lives. And in the end, how all of these different systems put together impact sustainability indicators like biodiversity, food security, or greenhouse gas emissions. Also in this model, we incorporate some loops of sustainability, particularly the limit of land available at the national and then at the global level when the models are aggregated to include the aspect of sustainability. The number 3 theme that I wanted to present, and with this I close my presentation, is the specific actions that I particularly have been involved in the Fable consortium along these years, both within the Fable consortium and outside. First, I would like to talk about the Senaton, which is a concept coined by the Fable consortium, a little bit in the idea of doing like a marathon of a lot of scenarios, meaning a lot of people at the national level having country teams, planning scenarios that are relevant for themselves, and then coming together as a group to do one global exercise. That's what a Senaton is. Here, as Sylvia was saying, we didn't focus so much on capacity building as a top-down relationship, but definitely more like a co-design or working together to improve national level models to make them more realistic based on the preferences of the national actors. In this way, I worked with country teams from India, from Rwanda, Ethiopia, South Africa, and the UK, to name a few, in the direction of the country teams themselves know best what are the characteristics of India and Rwanda, right? I will not even begin to be expert on what these countries would like to follow as policies, but then their knowledge of how the country is and the knowledge of the model that they gain joins our knowledge of the model itself and how it aggregates at the national, at the global level to come together as a Fable consortium. So this is more working together or co-design of the Fable consortium. There have been new countries added where I have also participated in capacity building, like, for example, the Gambia, who had just recently developed a calculator and is in the process after doing some stakeholder engagement to improve it. And beyond the Fable consortium, the IIASA's capacity development and academic training program led by Fabian also wants to go beyond the programs themselves to share these tools that we are developing in IIASA with other organizations. For example, we made presentations and capacity building sessions of the Fable calculator for the Royal Scientific Society of Jordan last year, also the International Science Council, and this year for the Sustainability Research and Innovation Conference in Panama. Particularly in the last one, my interest was to share with many countries in Latin America who still do not have a Fable calculator, the idea of it, and to welcome anybody to download the open source calculator, as I will do in the next slide, and to ask any questions in this conference. Last but not least, some months ago, we met with some new team of Ethiopia, who was very, very interested in using the model, was already advancing in learning the model, again, to get together and co-develop a model that is more realistic to the reality. And then right now in the process of seeing how the model can inform better Ethiopian long-term policies in land use. To close this presentation, I would like to share with you some of our results. We have several publications that you can find in the website. I will send you the links in the chat, namely a policy report and a special issue in Journal of Sustainability Science. Here you can find with more detail what the model is about, the specific policies that it already helped mention, the results that you can get with this type of tools. And last but not least, the link to the Fable calculator itself. I will also share it in the chat. You can just click on it right now, download it. It's an Excel file, explore it. And whenever you think this is useful for you or your country team, there is also the website of the Fable consortium. Feel free to ask any question you may have. Thank you very much. Up to you, Fabian.
Thank you, Katya. Again, if you have questions, then please post them in the chat. We will return to them after the next presentation. So it is now my pleasure to introduce our final speaker, Samir K.C. Samir is a senior research scholar in the IIASA Population Just Societies program. He has also recently joined King Abdullah University of Science and Technology, KAUST in Saudi Arabia. He's a founding member of and a professor at the Asian Demographic Research Institute, which is called for short ADRI, that's at Shanghai University. And here he leads the research pillar on human capital and development, or he led it until early this year. He is also a founding member of the new initiative in Nepal called Digital Data Systems for Development. And since 2020, this is kind of the icing on the cake, he's been affiliated with the Graduate School of Management at Kyoto University as a distinguished visiting professor. Samir, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Fabian. So let me share my screen. Screen share. So I am a demographer, a statistician. So at the moment, I don't have nice slides with lots of very, useful kind of pictures that can demonstrate what is going on in what Sylvia and Katya has presented. So as a demographer, our job at IIASA was to bring in the socioeconomic aspects, or the population, the people aspect in the system. So just quickly, I would say that, so what we do in demography is, so we also call it a formal demography, where it's about understanding population change. So for any given area, there is a population, and we want to understand how it is changing. And while we are trying to understand the population change, our focus is always about the structure, because the structure of the population, which is very important, and then also the distribution. So when you talk about structure, it's about, it could be about age, sex, gender. These are the fundamental sources of population heterogeneity, which means that demographic events and demographic rates of change differ by these factors. And then there are other structures of interest that we study, educational attainment being the kind of the main, let's say the third sources of population heterogeneity that we have kind of developed and studied at IIASA. And then in addition to that, we also study like how, the structure of the population in terms of skills, income, wealth, occupation, labor force participation, whether people are working or not. And then the other demographic and more demographic characteristics such as marital status, migration status. Like currently I'm in Saudi Arabia in KAUST, and I see that the migration status of population is very important to see how, how different rates are, demographic rates are. And then also in some countries, ethnicity, race, in caste, in the Hindu countries like where I am from Nepal, are also very important. So at the same time, we also study how the population distribution is changing. The rural-urban difference in distribution seems to be very important at IIASA because lots of our other models at IIASA needs kind of see that if you provide information by rural and urban, the consumptions or the consumption pattern are quite different in that case. But also the ecological regions such as plains, hills, seashores, and forest, and where people are living, like the river basins and all this. These are also very important distribution kind of characteristics. But the most common thing that we do is this administrative population distribution by administrative regions, because the data is readily available and lots of use as well, like because governments are set up at the administrative levels. So as a demographer, I joined IIASA in 2005, and I was almost a YSS peer that year, but somehow I didn't manage to come in. But since 2005, this is what I've been doing, and this is the main work that adding the education to this demographic calculations, right? So we have normally we have this age and sex as the main characteristics that are used to project the population or to show the population distribution. And when we are working with age and sex, we need there are basically three component of population change, which is fertility, mortality, and migration, international. And when we add education as the third dimension, the work increases, as we also need now the fertility by age, sex, and education, mortality also by age, and all of this by age, sex, and education. And on top of that, we also need to have the understanding of how the education transitions are happening by sex and also by age. At different ages, there is different rates of transitions, and also for each education level, there would be a different rates. Yeah. So this is our basic thing that we do. And if we add another dimension here, and this will just blow up, and then then we start collecting data and understanding those differentials. So in terms of applications, this demographic data are always useful and always in demand. At IIASA, we can think about, the calculations about food, water, energy, demand, which is linked with the population and also their structures and distribution, right? But there is a big demand of this kind of work in government ministries, in health, education, and even security, in terms of how much allocations of logistics has to be managed for this, depending on how big the population is, and in this case maybe age specific, right? And sometimes also gender specific. That if there are more children there or more elderly, so this issue of aging that we often hear is very to deal with that, to know how many people will be there in certain age we can kind of answer that. So this is the demand, and it's also used as a common denominator, right? So if you have something at the country level or some for a population, you want to calculate the per capita calculation, or if you have from your surveys or from your work, if you have generated kind of a rate, then you can also bring it to the population level to make it to give a value to it. So knowing, so what does it mean at the population level, so the bringing up. But we also do lots of projections because we need to think about the future, and most of the time what is happening is in lots of this work that we do with other groups is there is this shared socioeconomic pathways that the climate change research community are using. So we provide the future population and also human capital in terms of education and all. and then they use it, right? So this is the application, and so on doing all of this, we have a model which we call multidimensional demographic modeling. So I mean, demographic modeling is not very sophisticated as others. It has a very clean, simple formulas about how things change. But to predict or to understand the pattern is where the statistics can help. And some example of the applications at IIASA, as I said, there is this global population and human capital projections, which is by age, sex, and education attainment for 200 countries that we have been doing since almost 2 decades. And then not only at the global level, but also at the national level, we do this subnational projections, like, for example, for India, for Nepal, for China. So, for example, I can give you an example in Nepal where the Ministry of Ministry of Health is using this, want to know how many people are there at different ages at the ward level. So there are, I think, 6,000 plus wards in Nepal, and they want to know, like in this year, how many people will be there at different ages, meaning like, there could be the services to be provided for the elderly, for the younger ones, for the reproductive health related ones. And these are also used to monitor and evaluate, like, the health managers, whether they get the target and whether the target is met. So it's very important that we do it right. So this is just a picture of the global population. So this is a typical graph that we have, where we have a male on one side, female on the other side. We have age groups, and then these colors represent different education. The blue ones are more higher education, and the red one is the lowest education. And this is just the population. I don't know if you can see it, that it is 7.8 billion in 2020. And our most recent projection, which is not finalized yet, maybe smaller issues still are there, but this shows that the population of the world will continue to increase, peak around 10.12 billion or 13 billion, and then start coming down, right? But what we see is much older population. There are less and less children in the world, but more educated. Next, this is another, like, 200 countries. The aggregated one I showed you earlier, but these are the 200 countries that we do project. And then this is also a very quick video about how it's changing. I think I have one more slide, and then we can stop. So just showing that, there are still some countries in our model that projections that there still needs, there will be uneducated people there, less educated people are there. And and so finally, in terms of sharing, capacity building, we are doing a lot of it. So we share our methods and codes through, open through our papers, but also we have developed some R, some models in R that is shared as a package. And we also run lots of teaching trainings at, so whoever comes as a YSSP, we work like on, one-to-one basis. But there are these regular trainings that I'm involved in as a professor in Shanghai University. I used to teach a lot of course, still doing that at the Kyoto University and also in Saudi Arabia. So we'll be holding this. So these methods that we have developed at IIASA, we are basically trying to bring it out. And also through workshops, we are doing lots of these things. And say in Iran, I remember it was a very nice time. In India, we have done multiple ones, but also in the European Research Council, or the Joint Research Council of Europe, we have done that. And in terms of collaboration, people would sometimes come to IIASA, so they ask us where they can come. So we, as a guest scholar, they join. And recently, we had a colleague from Brazil who actually in 6 months developed the more Brazilian model and went back. But there are also online collaboration where people cannot come. We also do this with countries, people. And at times, we get lots of requests to support the community, like, for example, running specific scenarios. So just in conclusion, I would say that, like, knowing demography is useful to everyone in assessing the situation, planning, monitoring, and evaluation. But I think we need to modernize it in terms of methods and extending the scope. So scope meaning that adding more heterogeneity dimensions, but also going into, there's a lot of demand about going into smaller at the lower level, at the grid levels. I also complain here that many of our the model that use population, they kind of ignore the details. But what I say or think that, you know, that this can be tailored and to as per the demand. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Samir. Thank you for this wonderful overview. We now have about 10 minutes left for answering questions. I've seen that there are 8 questions in the chat right now. I will, originally I thought I'd go through them one by one from the top to the bottom, but I think it's probably easier to cluster them or to look at the relevance. Maybe I'd start with the third question, with the fourth question that was raised by Angelos. Number 4, dear Sylvia, thank you for the insightful presentation. Are there successful examples where the blah, blah, blah has to actually more efficient and sustainable energy food practices on the ground? And I think the question really is on the ground rather than resulting in another paper. Sylvia.
Yes, thank you, Fabian. Yeah, it's a very good question. I saw it. Thanks God I had time to think about it a little bit, because it's something that we have to prove also, and we should do, but we do not always record this well. It has to do with the level of, I mean, usually we work on a broader regional scale. However, I can tell you, to make the story short or not too long, I have one example. We worked on it. Sometimes we learn about the impact not immediately, but much later. And the example that I have is we worked on a study for the European Commission on the impact of EU consumption on deforestation. And maybe I think it was 5 years later, somebody called me, a journalist called me and said, oh, we are working on a new legislation. So I knew that this is, and if I could contribute, we could not then, mainly for funding reasons. But to make it short, I mean, there is a law now, where a supply chain law. So I think it had some impact, the study, although it's hard to directly prove it. Another example would be the biofuels and food security study, where we pointed early on to the need to really differentiate what type of biofuels if you don't want to compete with food. But that's maybe a short answer. It's a very good question, and we are struggling to get feedback to have an impact, and we are working towards an impact also for many of our projects. We need to prove that, and it's not always easy, but one should always keep it in mind. And I personally like this theory of change concept, which I didn't discuss, but yeah, maybe that's good for now.
Good, thank you, Sylvia. Then I would go to the next question. This was specifically about Fable. Katya, very briefly again, is the membership of the work group open? How does it actually work? Could you summarize this very briefly again?
Yes, the Fable consortium website has all the information. So the main recommendation is you can Google Fable calculator, and the first hit will be the Fable consortium website. The second one will be the Fable calculator. And in any of them, you will find eventually a submenu that says join, and it has all the requisites for new country teams to join, as well as the benefits. If somebody can also help me to put them in the chat, if it's possible here, we can also do that.
Okay. Good. Then I would like to sort of combine 2 questions. The first one was by Chukwu Emeka, about how do I get involved in systems analysis, and a later question by Ivalio Klebarov, what entities do we usually cooperate with, and is it governments, universities, agencies, and so on? Who can approach IIASA for cooperation or capacity building? I think what you will have heard is that there's a variety of ways of getting involved. This ranges from, a very individual researchers who can approach IIASA, other individual researchers, and say, look, this is what I'm doing. I see you're writing or you're working on something similar. Can we cooperate? This can sort of work at this level. This can even be at the early career stage level. And then it goes all the way to more complex collaborations where joint proposals are written. And then all the way to a situation that Sylvia also describes where we engage with stakeholders, state actors, governments, and that's of course a sort of a more long-term and longer process. And this cannot be sort of summarized just in a minute on how this actually works. But we have stakeholders with which we work from all fields, from NGOs, from universities, but also governments. I understand, Evalio, you're interested in air pollution. This is my field, or at least that's what I'm guessing. That's what you're interested in, and that's there we are working very closely with some of the governments, but we're building trust in the tools. We're building their trust in our tools over time. So this is sort of a long-term process. If you're specifically interested in capacity building, then you can contact me and we can chat about it. Or as I said, air pollution is also my field. Other than that, talk to any one of us, contact IIASA. We have a few names now, and we can think where we can help. All right, then I would like to go to the question that Olufemi Aluko has raised. This is number 6, I guess. Something very specific. Oh, no, I was actually looking for another question. There was more question about demographic modeling, but I think this has probably been resolved by Samir's presentation. There was a question about sort of the general overview, about the general sort of purpose of the models that have been presented, and about this nexus dynamics. If I look at my colleagues here, I think they will all sort of agree that many of our models are, so first of all, they are sort of looking into the future, but not necessarily as a way of forecasting, but the term that we are typically using is scenarios. So we think about alternative futures and not necessarily a one future with a range of uncertainties, but rather different steps that we can take into the future. And with this in mind, what we are also not trying to do is sort of predict or forecast or run scenarios for the very near future, like next week or in 3 or 4 months, but rather we typically use models that look more long-term into the future. As we said at the beginning, the problems that we are analyzing, such as climate change or the food, water, energy nexus, these are long-term problems that require long-term solutions. And therefore, we are really interested in sort of what are the long-term consequences, what are the long-term alternative future pathways that we can study, and of course they will have also short-term implications. So these are the kinds of questions that we are trying to answer. We then had an interesting question about indigenous technological knowledge. This was number 3. And the notion of Vavilov's centers. Katya, I don't know whether you would like to take this, whether Fable uses, can handle indigenous technological knowledge, and if so, how?
Fable works with anybody who's interested in understanding the links between the sectors. And for example, there are some agricultural practices or traditional knowledge from indigenous communities, which could definitely be included in the model. As Sylvia said, this is definitely a process of co-design. So I don't know of methodologies, particularly that specialize on indigenous communities per se, but I do know of some tools for this co-design of models that can be useful to translate, for example, traditional agricultural practices into the model. Our colleague Barbara Willard published a manual on stakeholder engagement in these co-design projects. So that's the one I have in mind, but maybe Sylvia and Samir can also complement.
Yeah, no, I can just briefly say, I assume it's about indigenous agricultural knowledge. Maybe it's something more also than that. But when it comes to agricultural knowledge, it's quite obvious that I think the future will need some of this. Something like intercropping, agroforestry. So the current system of this large-scale monocultures has not deemed sustainable in many parts of the world. So I think it is important. I can just say that in the agricultural model I am working with, we are currently developing intercropping systems. So land utilization types which combine a fuel, not a biofuel, but an oil plant with grassland so that livestock can be underneath, or coconut intercropping system. So we are working along this line, but it has not been modeled that much, I have to say. I think it's really the next step that is necessary. So in that sense, the knowledge, I think this input would be very interesting. And thank you for the question.
Thank you, Katya and Sylvia. I think we have two more short questions. We've already run a little bit over time, but I think we take still these two questions. One is on tools at IIASA on transportation systems and their environmental and socioeconomic impacts. Yes, IIASA runs tools for modeling transportation, but at sort of always in a global context. So don't think of it as geographically explicit that we model every road or every vehicle or even shared mobility or sort of city center systems like that. But we're sort of looking at what are the long-term perspectives of different transportation modes and different systems for traction and so on. So this is part of a larger energy systems model, which is called the message model. And you will find under this reference also publications at IIASA about this. And then I would like to come back to an earlier question by Olufemi or Aluko about games and climate change education for adolescents. Katya, you're smiling. Would you like to say something about that? No? But maybe Sylvia, you had said something about games?
I can just really advise, please look at I have provided website links. Please connect to them and they will help you. This Nexus games, but I also wanted to say that this to work with high school people, I think secondary school, I think that is it on the agenda of IIASA? I'm asking Fabian back. I know that a colleague of mine, he would be also interested to go down in age a little bit. And I can say from the perspective of working in African countries, in East Africa, I worked in particular, it would be very interesting because, well, we know from Samir that the population is very young in Africa, or Samir can give us the numbers even. And I think it would be important to go down. I mean, here at IIASA, we tend to work with very highly skilled people, so on the top level postdoc, but going down to younger people and translating it is probably something we should think of.
Yeah, and to answer that question, yes, we're working on that. We're exploring this at the moment. How we do this, we take the first steps, but very small steps at the moment. Good. I think we have covered a lot, not only in the presentations, but also in the discussion. So I think this brings us to a close. Thank you very much for your presence here today. Thank you for all the speakers. Thank you for the audience. The recording of this webinar will be accessible on the IIASA website and our YouTube channel. And we provide also the links to all the resources mentioned during the presentations on that site. We trust that you found the discussions engaging and informative, and we appreciate all the questions that you have submitted to us. Your feedback is invaluable in enhancing our future events in this series, so kindly take a moment to participate in the post-meeting survey, which will appear in your browser after you exit the session. So this is, of course, anonymous, and the insights that we gather will guide us in our continuous improvement of efforts in upcoming events. So we look forward to welcoming you back at our next IIASA webinar on migration in November 2023. And for updates, please follow us on our social media channels. And have a wonderful day. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Right.
Everyone.
Thank you.